Now I'm going to show you how to render wood. So I have 3 markers here, an E31, E55, E15, and I have a brown watercolour pencil. So first of all, I'm going to put down the lightest tone, which is the E31, and I'm just going to do this very, very lightly. As you can see, I'm hardly sort of touching the paper. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it. If I do put a lot of pressure on it, I'll end up with something more like that. And if I stop anywhere, I'll end up with sort of darkish lines, and it's not very effective. So I'm just doing this, as I said, very lightly. And my marker is running low on ink, but that's not such a bad thing when you're rendering wood, because it sort of gives that effect of the wood grain. So I might just go over it now with the E55, and I've just refilled this one, so that's got a fair bit of ink in it. So it's very important just to go very lightly again with this one and not stop anywhere. Okay, so as you can see, you don't have to do much to make it already look like wood grain. But I do want to add some more details into this. So what I've done is I've had a look at some images online. I've printed a few out. It's always good to use reference to do this sort of thing, because you know, it just makes it easier to be able to try and copy those same kind of lines. So I'm going to have a look at this one here, and one way of doing it is to use a marker, the pointy part of your marker, to do the grain. So we could try just putting it down once again very lightly like this. We have to work really quickly because, as we know, if we work too slow, we get sort of blobby lines, which we're trying to avoid. When you're doing these kind of exercises, it's important to make your area larger, to work on an area larger than you actually want your finished image to be. So I would be cropping this down to perhaps around about something like that. So as you can see, it looks much more realistic once you've cropped it down then with those edges on there. So it's important to always work bigger than you actually need. I'm going to add now some of the grain work using the watercolour pencil. So if I look at this image here, I can see that's made up of lots of little lines. For this, it's always important to have a really sharp point on your pencil. I'm just adding these lines very lightly here. And I'll try and replicate this ring that's coming around on the outside of that area. As you can see, there's lots of little short little lines. Don't try and rush it, because you'll end up with it not looking quite as authentic as if you followed the example here. So lots of little lines. So because we used watercolour pencil, that means we can now go over that watercolour pencil with a marker, and as you can see, you get this darker tone and it's sort of blending in the pencil with the marker work underneath. So sometimes you might want to get that sort of effect, but other times you might want your lines to be really quite sharp and more detailed, so you don't always have to use it with the marker over the top. But using a watercolour pencil gives you that flexibility to be able to sometimes use it with the marker and sometimes use it just on its own. And I noticed my pencil was getting quite blunt, so I'm going to give it another sharpen. Make sure I've always got a sharp point. So I'm going to try and do some of those other lines now. And as I was saying, sometimes I might want to just leave the line work without blending it in. So I could go over these areas that I've done here and just pick out some to make really quite sharp. If you were rendering an object made of wood, you would always render the form first. So that is looking at it as a three-dimensional object and rendering it in that way. So I'm going to use my E31 once again, and I'm going to do this cylinder that I have here. And I'm just going to, I have my light. I'm imagining that my light is coming from the top left-hand side. So that would mean that this face here will be lighter, and it will be lighter at the top and get darker as it moves down towards the bottom of the cylinder. So I need to make sure that it's darker underneath here. So I'm doing all of that before adding any of that wood grain effect. just have it a little bit darker up the top here because it's sort of rolling away from the light. So all of these things help to make your objects look like they're three-dimensional. Okay, I'm imagining that the grain is sort of going down this way. And remembering that this needs to be the lightest part of the cylinder because it's closest to the light. So once again, it would be a little bit darker towards the bottom. And I might just get the E55, just to put in some darker tones to really show that that's a three-dimensional cylinder. And that's already looking a little bit like grain again, once again. And I might try and blend that a little more with the E31. It's the lighter tone. So as you can see, I've done the foundation of that cylinder first. I've done the main colour of it before I start working on the grain work. So now I'm going to use the watercolour pencil once again to put in some lines that will help to show the grain of the wood. So I can afford to do it a little bit darker down here. Once I get closer to the lighter area, those lines will be also lighter. And on this side, they would follow through from the grain that's on this plane. And it's important to keep the lines really random, so not uniform, because that's the way the wood grows. Okay, again I'm going to use the E31 to blend in some of that line work that I've done with the watercolour pencil. Just going to use a little bit of white pencil now, just to touch on those edges there. I'll see if it actually shows up. Sometimes it's not very noticeable because of the lighter colour. A bit of reflected light underneath.